All right, today we're going to talk about alternate strategies of reproduction, alternatives within a species or within a population. So sometimes this is called behavioral polyphenism. Poly just meaning many, and phenism meaning like phenotypes. So many forms, um, but they're often morphological and behavioral, and maybe even life history differences between individuals of the same species that are competing for reproduction somehow. So on this slide, these are both adult male dung beetles, and some of the males that develop and become big and as larvae, when they become adults, they develop these big horns and fight for access to females. And other males, when they're larvae, they don't gather as many resources, and they're going to become smaller adults. And so, molting to an adult form after the larvae pupate has horns and tries to fight would not be a very effective strategy for a small male. So based on the amount of resources that this larval beetle acquired during development, there might be an alternative way of competing for females instead of trying to grow horns and fight for them. And that's one of the many kinds of examples that we'll talk about. And there's different complexities involved, which is part of the fun. So here's the first complexity. There's really two different major ways that these alternative strategies exist in populations. The first is called conditional strategies. Basically, your strategy depends on your condition. This is like the dung beetles that I just talked about. So a large male in good condition adopts one strategy, and a small male in lousy condition adopts a different strategy. Those strategies are not genetically fixed. Obviously, the developmental pathways are influenced by genetics, but you're not predetermined to be one pathway or the other. Which genetic pathway you go down during development is a function of your condition or the resources that you have to allocate during development as you grow up. So here, one strategy is definitely better than the others. It's better to be in good condition and adopt this more dominant strategy. And the worst strategy, the inferior strategy, is has lower evolutionary fitness, but it's been termed making the best of a bad job, which what that means is that even though the inferior strategy is worse than the good strategy, it's better than it would have been if they had tried to be the other strategy. So if you're a little male dung beetle, you don't grow horns and you don't try to fight, you have lower fitness than if you were a successful fighter, but you might have higher fitness than if you were an unsuccessful fighter by trying to sneak copulate with female beetles. The real opposite of this is the evolutionarily stable strategies that are fixed genetic differences, like we conceptualized with the hawk-dove game. So if these different strategies are evolutionarily stable, as you know, they must have equal average fitness, so that both alleles, as it were, persist over time in the population. So we'll talk about each of these things and have some nice examples. The conditional strategies, again, the reproductive strategy depends on the condition or competitive ability. They're not genetically fixed. It's often related to size or age, this kind of competitive ability, because that reflects the likelihood of winning fights, for example, or resource holding potential. Lots of possible examples of this. We talked about the dung beetles already. In fact, conditional strategies are probably much more common than ESS strategies in nature. So here's just another example. This is a type of toad where males call to attract females for mating in these little pond things, and some males are big and produce a call that is attractive to females. Bigger male frogs and toads produce lower pitched sounds because of the size of their body and the resonator. And so if you're a small male, you could call for females, but you'd have a more higher pitched call and it wouldn't be as attractive to females. So some small males, instead of calling, they act as what's called a satellite of a calling male. So here you've got a male that is calling to attract females, and this is also a male, and what he's doing is he's just hanging out trying to intercept females that show up to the calling male. So if this calling male attracts a female, that female might actually be intercepted by this satellite male. And the data in this paper here show that there's a body size difference between males that act as callers and males that act as satellites. And again, it's likely that the callers have higher fitness than the satellites, but the satellite male has higher fitness than he would if he tried to call and attract females on his own, because it'd have a lousy, unattractive call. There's some work that looked at what I call optimal satellite behavior. Basically, if you're going to be a satellite, then you can think about, well, how would you sort of optimize your approach? How would you best do that? And one prediction is that if you're a satellite of a calling male, then you'd do better if you are around males that females find attractive, right? So you want to be a satellite of an attractive male, but you don't want to go all the way up to that attractive male, because then you know he's bigger and stronger than you, and he might just beat you up. So you want to get near a calling male that females find attractive, and that's what these data on crickets show. The basically males could choose between playbacks of two calls of other male crickets, and this axis is the probability that the males chose the song that females prefer, and that's as a function of the body size of the male. So basically what you see is that small male crickets typically preferred the song that females prefer, and consistent with them acting as satellites, and large males were just sort of indifferent or lower probability of choosing the call that females prefer. And then if you look at the probability of the satellite male actually touching the speaker that is playing the call, then the ones that are big males are likely to go all the way to the speaker, possibly initiating a fight, and the ones that are small are very unlikely to go all the way to the speaker. So both of those predictions of what would a good satellite male do are met in this data set. Plus it's crickets, so it's good. Okay, so ESS fixed alternate strategies is a whole different kind of evolutionary dynamic, right? The strategies are genetically fixed, and so they must have equal average fitness over time if they're going to persist in the population. That's what the evolutionarily stable part means. And there are a few examples of these. Most are 2-strategy systems, but there are also a few 3-strategy systems that are described in the literature. The kind of classic 2-strategy system is in salmon, where you have a life history where the fish are born in freshwater streams, and then they go to the ocean and they grow in the ocean for a variable amount of time, and then they swim back up into that stream and they mate, and the salmon die. The eggs are fertilized externally. The female lays the eggs on sort of the gravel of the stream. So a female life history is that basically she comes back into the stream and reproduces at 3 years of age. And then the males, there's two different ways of doing it. They start out, and some of them come back after 2 years. Those are called jacks. And some of them come back after 3 years, and those are called hook nose, because they have this kind of big uh, mouth that can bite and fight with each other, and so on. So the hook nose and jack are genetically heritable, separate strategies that persist in the population. And what's happening is that the large hook-nosed males are fighting for access to females in the breeding areas, and the closer you can get to a female, the more likely you are that your sperm are what fertilize her eggs when they're released with this external fertilization. And what you can see is that males that are big can get pretty close to females by fighting, and that males that are small can get pretty close to females by sneaking. But if you're a small male and you try to fight your way in, you're going to lose, and you're not going to get close enough to the female to fertilize eggs. So the small males are said to be sort of sneaking in. You might have a hook-nosed male and a female preparing to fertilize eggs, and the small male isn't seen as a threat by the big male because he's not a fighter morph, and he can just sort of dash in at the end and release sperm and fertilize some of those eggs. So like other ESS kind of models that you've looked at, we might expect fitness to be frequency dependent. So if the proportion of hook-nosed males in the population is 100%, then we expect jacks to do really well. And if the proportion of hook-nosed males in the population is low, then we expect them to do well. So both of these strategies should do better when it's below its equilibrium level in the population. And that's just because if everybody's a hook nose and fighting, then the sneakers have an easy time getting in there and getting some fertilizations. And if everyone's all these fighters, only some of them are going to win against other fighters, so their success goes down. And the converse is true as well. As if the population is basically composed of these small sneaker jacks and the hook nose fighter guys are rare, then they're going to have an easy time monopolizing females because they're not fighting with other males as much. So that's kind of the theoretical prediction of negative frequency dependent selection. And here's the data on whether or not fitness is approximately equal over evolutionary time. And this is just done as a ratio. The success as a jack divided by the success of the hook nose. If they have equal fitness, then that ratio should be 1. And this was done across the lifespan, the whole life history. There's the survivorship to maturity times the breeding lifespan times the mating success during that breeding lifespan. So the huge difference between jack and hook nose is this survivorship to maturity. So about 13% of jacks survive to maturity and come back from the ocean, and that's about twice as high as it is for the hook nose. And that makes sense because they spend one less year in the ocean facing possible predators and so on. So your survivorship to return to breed is much higher if you're a jack than if you're a hook-nose. The breeding lifespan is basically the number of days that you're competing for fertilizations with females is higher in hook-nose than it is in jacks, because they have bigger body sizes and more resources to keep going. Remember, they all just die after reproduction. They deplete all those resources in reproduction. And then you can look at mating success, is about 2/3 in jacks what it is in the hook-nose. And so if you multiply all those together, it turns out that this ratio is 0.95, which is not statistically different from 1, which is equal fitness. So the data support the idea that these two strategies have approximately equal fitness over, relatively long periods of time, many generations. That, of course, then allows both alternate genetic strategies to stay in the population. Excuse me. So the rough is a super cool, kind of complicated example that combines conditional and ESS approaches to alternate strategies. So the rough is this shorebird. It's common in much of Europe, and it's called a ruff because of these funny feathers around the head and the neck. And what you'll see is that there are both genetic ESS alternate strategies in the ruffs and conditional differences. So the genetic fixed ESS strategies are independents versus satellites, and the satellites are the same kind of thing where they're not fighting for access to females. The independents do fight for access to females, and the ones that win the fights become what are called residents, and the ones that lose the fights are called marginals. So the difference between residents and marginals is conditional, and the difference between independents and satellites is genetic. So it's a lek breeding system. Here's a bunch of males on a lek. What's cool is that the behavioral alternative strategies are also coupled with morphological differences. So the ones with a white ruff are satellite males, and the ones with dark or kind of coppery melanin influenced ruffs, those are ones that are the independents. And those independents fight with each other. Here's two independents fighting, and some of them win, some of them lose in these fights to have these display territories at the lek. And then not all of those independent males successfully establish display territories. So those are what become the marginals, right? So this is a diagram of the sort of complex mating system. It's sort of like a three-part mating system, but really it's a hybrid between a genetic ESS alternate strategies, independents versus satellites, and then some of those independents are successful and become residents, and some of them are not successful and become marginals, and that difference is a conditional strategy based on fighting success at the lek, at the display area. So the question is, do the fitnesses of those different strategies meet our predictions based on evolutionary stable strategies versus conditional type strategies? And this guy Frank Guadimo studied this for 3 years. He studied the fitnesses of birds at leks over 3 years, and divided the data just as well, what are the percentage of the males in the population that employ these different strategies, and what's their fitness? What percentage of the copulations do they get? And the first thing you can really see is that the marginals are real losers. So the average percentage of the population that are marginals is basically 52%, and they got only 1.6% of the copulations that were observed. So they're definitely losers. The residents are 29% of the population and get 88% of the matings. So this resident versus marginal difference is certainly, you know, meeting our prediction that they have unequal fitness, and the marginals are kind of losers here. Now, what's interesting though is the satellites make up about 19% of the population and got around 10% of the copulations, which if it was genetically ESS, then if satellites are 19% of the population, you'd expect them to get 19% of the copulation. So the satellites got about half as many copulations as you would expect if this was in equilibrium ESS, fixed genetic difference between satellites and independents. Just be careful, don't compare satellite fitness with resident fitness, because the residents are the winners of the independents. You have to compare the satellite fitness with the residents and the marginals, right? Not just the residents. Anyway, Wadimo was sort of surprised by this and investigated a bit further, and one of the things that he discovered is that the females appear to be attracted to the satellite males with the white ruffs. So if you look across different leks, how many satellite males are there and how many females are there, there's a positive relationship. So females don't just pick a male at a lek, they also visit multiple leks, and these data suggest that females go more to leks that have more satellites, suggesting females are attracted to those satellites, and it's possible that the females are mating with satellites off of the lek that were not observed in the study. So what Wadimo concluded was that, as we've seen within the independent genetic strategy, resident versus marginal is a conditional strategy, and being the winner, the resident is much higher fitness than being the loser, marginal. The satellites appear to get fewer copulations than required if it were an ESS, about half as many, and it's possible that they live longer and have a longer reproductive lifespan, but this idea that they also may have made it off of the lek because of this female attraction to the white rough color might be increasing their fitness beyond what you'd observe just watching the leks. A kind of neat system because there's behavior and morphology tied in, and there's genetic ESS as well as conditional effects in these birds. All right, 3 strategy genetic systems. Now this is getting kind of complicated. The marine isopods are talked about in the textbook, so I'm not going to go over it here. They're also in the Dr. Tatiana book that you're reading. There's relatively few of these. The other one that's become pretty famous in the last 20-ish years is with lizards, these side-blotched lizards, Uda stansburiana. And the reason is the males come in 3 color morphs. And again, just like the ruffs, there's an association between the behavioral phenotype and the morphological color phenotype. So blue throat males, obviously they have a blue throat, but the behavioral differences are that they're sort of moderately or intermediate aggressive, defend small territories, and they defend and mate guard a female that's on that territory. So they're essentially adopting a small territory monogamous, not really monogamous, but they're guarding, a single female. Orange throat males are very aggressive. They defend large territories and mate with as many females as possible within across that whole territory. So multiple females co-occur with orange throat males on those larger territories. And then there are yellow striped throat males that are sneakers, that don't defend a territory, they don't mate guard females, they just attempt to copulate sort of under the radar of orange throat and blue throat males. Here's pictures of their throat colors, orange, blue, and kind of yellow stripy. Here's a map of some of the territories across the males, marked by color. The yellow ones aren't really territories; those are just movements of where the males went, because they're not defended; they're just sneakers. Researchers have shown that the throat color and, by implication, the behavioral strategy are genetic. So this is yellow, blue, orange, and the color of the offspring. And if you remember parent-offspring regression, this is the slope is 0.48. When you do heritability regression with one parent, the heritability is 2 times the slope. So that's suggesting a heritability of about 96%, or almost entirely genetically determined strategies. That 96% is not different from 1. So this 3-strategy genetic system was called the rock, paper, scissors game, after the game that kids or people play, where they go 1, 2, 3, and then they stick out their hands. In a fist is a rock, or with their hand flat is paper, or with their fingers like scissors, that's scissors. And the reason for this analogy is that in the rock, paper, scissors game, rock beats scissors, scissors beats paper, and paper beats rock. So each strategy has a strength and a weakness. Each one can beat another strategy, but can also be beaten by another strategy. And what they observed in the lizards is that these aggressive polygynous orange males, they beat the less aggressive, more monogamous mate guarding blue males. But the sneaker yellow males, they can beat the aggressive large territory orange males, but they're not successful as sneakers against the mate guarding blue males. So mate guarding blue beats the sneaker yellow. And so you'd expect, just like in 2-strategy systems, that there's some kind of negative frequency dependent selection, but instead with a 2-strategy system you expect some kind of stable equilibrium. With a 3-strategy genetic system with negative frequency dependent selection, you expect some kind of oscillation, some kind of cyclical outcome over time. And they collected data on the percentage of blue, yellow, and orange across a bunch of different years. And this is a kind of complicated diagram to follow, but if you just look, there's an axis of percentage blue from 0 to 100, percentage yellow from 0 to 100, and percentage orange from 0 to 100. So any point in this triangle gets you the percentage of each morph in the population, and then you can um, try to follow what the population did year after year after year. So um, try to make this a little bit bigger. Maybe like that. So start in 1990, the population's right there. So what that means is that it is about, I don't know, 12% orange. It is about, so you do that by cutting across here is the percent orange of that point. It is about 30% yellow across that way, and it's about, I don't know what that is, 65% or something blue. Make it so that it all adds up to 100%. I'm just kind of approximating the numbers. So you can see where that population is at that point in time, and then see how it moves year after year. So from 1990 to 1991, I'm going to need a different color here so you can see this stuff. All right, so from 1990 to 1991, this is where the population moved. So it increased in blue. It went from whatever that is, 60% to 80, 75, 80%, right? And so the blues are very common in 91. And what happens in that year, what the population shifts, so here's the 92 point. So blues were very common, and then they decreased in frequency the next year in a way that favored oranges, mostly, some yellows. And then, so the oranges from 91 to 92 increased from whatever this is, 20% up to almost 50%. And then the next year, the oranges did really lousy. They went down, that's to 93, 94, here's 95, 96, 97. You can see I have so much stuff drawn on this graph, you probably can't see anything on it anymore. But if you think back to the original graph, what you're seeing is there's some kind of movement and cycling around this triangular space where it looks as though from year to year, especially common morph does pretty lousy the next year. So that's that frequency dependent cycling. Okay, so that's the end of ESS and conditional strategies. And the last topic about alternate strategies is sex and sex change. So as you know, what we normally call sexual dimorphism is a different forms of males and females. So here's a male, here's a female, here's a male, here's a female. They look different, they behave different, their life history strategies are different, their gametes are different. Those are surely alternative strategies, right? Although we don't typically think of them as alternative strategies, being male as female is an alternate reproductive strategy. And they're often genetically determined. So in mammals, you think, oh, females are XX and males are XY in their sex chromosomes. In birds and in butterflies, there's also chromosomal sex determination, but the females are ZW and males are ZZ chromosomes. So birds and butterflies, females are the heterogametic sex. In lots of insects, not all of them, but in many insects, females are XX and males are X. They have one X sex chromosome. If you read the literature about this, you might see that in lots of insects it says, oh, females are XX and males are XO, and that O is really intended to mean like X naught. It's not implying that there is an O chromosome in the males. Males basically just are haploid at the X, and females are diploid at the X in lots of these insect species, but not all. So, as you know, genetic fixed alternate strategies require equal evolutionary fitness over time, which would suggest that in these chromosome determined sex determination systems, males and females have equal average fitness over time. And that would lead us to this topic of the ESS sex ratio. So if you look in populations of organisms in the wild, what you see is that most of them have sex ratios that are approximately 50-50, or 50% male, 50% female. And you can ask, well, why is that? Because only females are truly reproductive in populations, right? Males aren't, they don't really have fecundity in the same way as females do. Males are basically a background for genetic recombination, and it's the females that are producing the kids with male fertilization. If you were optimizing your reproductive output, a population that had more females would have higher fitness than a population that has fewer females, right? Or let's say a species that has more females would have higher fitness than a species that has more males. So this observation that most populations have about 50-50 sex ratios tells us something about how natural selection works at the group versus the individual or gene level. We've already talked about this before briefly, but if we're thinking about how natural selection creates adaptations, those adaptations could be for the benefit of the group or the species or the population, in which case we would expect to see sex ratios that are very female biased, that have high population level reproduction. But we don't. We see populations that have 50-50 sex ratios, and that's because of individual level selection or gene level selection, which is what we concluded before when we talked about levels of selection. That selection is stronger at creating adaptations that are at the level of the individual or the gene. So in terms of individual level selection, what you're thinking about the sex ratio would reveal is that if males are rare, then the expected fitness of male offspring goes up and would be higher than the expected fitness of female offspring. And the same in reverse for females. If females are rare, then the expected fitness of female offspring would be higher than the expected fitness of male offspring. And this is just because every kid is genetically produced by a female mom and a male dad, right? So despite the fact that there are these sex chromosomes that influence the sex determination, there are modifier alleles that can co-evolve with this. We talked about antagonistic coevolution before in other contexts, but there are selfish genes called meiotic drive alleles that, for example, if there's a mutation on the X chromosome that makes the X chromosome more likely to be passed into the gametes than the Y chromosome, then that's not an adaptation for the population or for the individual. It's an adaptation at the level of the gene that makes that X chromosome and that driving allele on the X chromosome more likely to be passed on. But that sets up selection pressure on alternatives on the Y chromosome, and so meiotic drive alleles. Meiotic drive means that at meiosis, one allele is more likely to be in the gametes than you would expect by chance, right? So you would expect 50-50 X and Y. Meiotic drive alleles make it so it's more likely that there are X alleles or X chromosomes in the sperm. So meiotic drive alleles are counterbalanced by meiotic drive suppressors. And that should lead to evolutionary stable strategies of a 50-50 sex ratio with negative frequency dependent selection and antagonistic coevolution between meiotic drive alleles and meiotic drive suppressors. The negative frequency dependent selection part I want to just go over because it's not initially intuitive. People sort of just think, oh, well, if males are XY and they make gametes, half of those gametes are X and half of them are Y, right? So the negative frequency dependent part comes because, as I said, each kid is produced by a genetic father and a genetic mother. So the proportion of males and females in the population is going to be determined by their average fitnesses. So imagine you have a population that has 9 females and 1 male. Each female produces 1 kid. So the population fitness is 9. The average female fitness is 1 kid per female. But the average male fitness is 9. This one male is the sire or the dad of all 9 of those kids. So if males are rare, the male fitness is much higher than the female fitness. If females are rare, females should increase. So again, you have a 10 individual population. In this case, 1 female and 9 males. Right? So that 1 female has 1 kid. So the population fitness is 1. The average female fitness is 1. But the average male fitness is now only 1 out of 9. You had 9 males, and only 1 of them became the genetic father of that 1 kid. So when females are rare, male fitness is much lower than female fitness. So you would balance towards an equal sex ratio at ESS, where suppose you have 5 females and 5 males, population fitness is 5, average female fitness is 1, and average male fitness is 1. So that's the basis of this negative frequency dependent selection part, acting on sex ratio as an ESS fixed genetic alternate strategy. And that applies probably to most populations of most organisms most of the time. There are some populations that have extremely skewed sex ratios, and there's like some fig wasps and things in the Tatiana book. But there's sort of different evolutionary dynamics that play with that. Our question sort of next is, okay, so sex can be genetically fixed ESS alternative strategies. Can sex also sometimes be a conditional strategy? It turns out it can, and there's some interesting things. So hermaphrodites or what are called simultaneous hermaphrodites happen in a bunch of mollusks. Snails and slugs are simultaneously both male and female, but they still mate with each other in order to have recombination and genetic variability among their offspring. So here's two big garden snails that are mating with each other. They're both male and female. So it's like you have this one that is male and female, and this one that is male and female, and they can both swap sperm and have their eggs fertilized. So in these simultaneous hermaphrodites, if you think back to our sort of basis of what's the difference between males and females, if you're a simultaneous hermaphrodite that is about to reproduce with another simultaneous hermaphrodite, would you rather be in the sort of male reproductive function or the female reproductive function? You think, well, eggs are rare and expensive and have a lot of energy resource value, whereas sperm are numerous and cheap, right? So in these simultaneous hermaphrodites, it's to each one's advantage to fertilize more of the other one's eggs, to put out more sperm than eggs that it uses. It wants all of its eggs to be fertilized, of course, but each one sort of competes to be the male, and that's why this article was titled "Sex and Violence in Hermaphrodites," and the violence part comes about because lots of these mollusks fight each other to be the one that is the sperm donor, and there's they have specialized sort of structures that they can stab each other and fight and all this about being the quote sort of winner is the one that becomes the male. So that's a conditional reproductive strategy in these simultaneous hermaphrodites. In fish, there are also some fish where sex is a conditional reproductive strategy. And what appears to be going on in fish really is that because they keep growing as they get older, the relationship between fitness and size can change depending on the mating system. So here's fecundity and here's age or size. Larger females have bigger bodies and can hold more eggs, right? So there's a positive relationship between body size and reproductive potential in female fish that goes something like that. In a polygynous mating system, males fight for access to those females, and only large males win those fights. So in a polygynous mating system, if you're a small fish who is male, you have really, really low fitness potential, and you grow and it gets a little bit better, but at some point where you have high fitness is only if you're a large male that can dominate the harem, the polygynous harem of a coral reef or whatever it is. So at some point there's a body size at which potential fitness, higher potential fitness switches from female to male. So when you're smaller, you have higher potential fitness as a female, and when you're larger, you have higher potential fitness as a male in these polygynous mating systems. In monogamous mating systems, or if there's really extensive male parental care, then male fitness function with size is much more flat because they can't, they're not winning a polygynous harem. So in those, the higher fitness in smaller individuals have higher fitness if they're males, and larger individuals have higher fitness if they're females. There's also this kind of inflection point where the fitness function changes from favoring small males to favoring large females. And fish, a few species of fish change sex consistent with that. So a strategy, a life history strategy called protogyny is when the fish start as females, and then as they get bigger and bigger and bigger, they may change sex and become a male. So blue-headed wrasse, a male that is the winner of the reef that holds the harem, he might spawn 40 times each day. This is the male. This is a female here. The male has very, very high fitness if he is the dominant male on that reef. And if you remove that dominant male, like catch him in a net or whatever, then a large female changes sex and becomes a male and becomes the new dominant male on that reef. So there's a conditional strategy of being female when you're small and being male when you're large in these blue-headed wrasse. And there's other examples of fish that change sex as well. For example, the opposite is you could start out as a male. This is called protandry. It's rare relative to protogyny, and this is again favored when under monogamy or high levels of male parental care. If female fecundity increases as a function of size faster than male fecundity increases as a function of size. And this happens in anemone fish, where there are monogamous mated pairs that live in the anemone. Male fitness is limited by female reproduction, right? So under strict monogamy, males can only increase their fitness if the female's fitness also increases. Well, female fitness is limited by the number of eggs that she can produce, which is limited by her body size. So in these anemone fish pairs, the larger fish is female, which means that both of them have higher fitness. Both of them, as a monogamous pair, produce more total offspring if the larger one, if whoever is bigger, is functioning as the female. And in fact, if you do an experiment and you remove the larger fish, then someone else comes in, and whichever one is bigger, either the new fish or the previous male, becomes the new female. And so that switching of sex is this idea of sex being sort of conditional on body size and that social environment too. Mostly these fish that change sex can do it only once and can't switch back and forth. But there are a few examples of some fish species that can change sex more than once. But anyway, so sex can be both a ESS strategy when we think about chromosome sex determination and meiotic drive suppressor alleles with negative frequency dependent selection on sex ratio. And sex can also be a conditional strategy where there's sex change reflecting the condition and fecundity relationship with body size. So that's that.